going back to GitPod. So the great thing about using this is that you don't need any of the resource. You don't even need Mongo or anything there. I have no installation steps in this lesson specifically to make it more easy to learn. And then the next lessons that we'll go into that will deal with installing it locally in a couple different ways, as simply as possible, just so that you understand how to install them and teach you how to debug certain problems that may happen if you install it on one OS versus another. It's a very common thing, having worked in a boot camp. Installing software often was a full day in a boot camp. And bear in mind, these could be 3 to 4 hour classes just to get GitHub, Docker, this kind of software installed. So if you can do something to avoid that and make the installation process more seamless, you could that should be our goal as educators, to get them learning the content more than the configuration. So, and we should use configuration to that advantage. So, case in point, normally you'd have to do MongoDB and then stuff like this to run it in the background, which is actually this command right here, MongoDB -db path and all this to kind of log it out to run it in the background. But instead, I pre-configured this to do that for you. So I don't have to explain it in that much detail right now. And then all you have to do to start learning is pull up these readmes, and they may look a little funny if they're not in if they're like this one, which is built for the slideshow, but it's still usable. Just won't be as pretty. So let's give that an example. So if you open this up, one thing you might want to do is learn how to open this in preview mode, unlike me. There we are. So all that's junk. So why learn MongoDB, right? Well, simple. It's, this isn't updated. So, because this hasn't pushed from my latest git commit, sorry. So I'll go back here when I started. So why learn MongoDB? So MongoDB is great because it's built as sort of like, for layman's sake, I'm going to say it's a subset. So it's inspired by JavaScript, but it's a database. And so in this lesson, we won't even be going over JavaScript so much as we will be going over JavaScript-like syntax in the use case of databases and creating and using basic CRUD methods in databases. Hopefully that makes sense, or will in a minute. So let's give an example, right? So here we have JavaScript, which is originally a web-based language and a scripting language, and now is a full-blown programming language by most standards, especially because now it compiles down from ES6 or whatever above. Oh, look, I look professional. Anyway, so let's give another example, right? So so below that we have JSON, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And that's kind of the new standard for how it's largely replaced XML for transmitting data from a server to a client. The client being your browser, the server being somewhere up in the magical cloud for simplicity, right? Some other device, some computer somewhere away from you. Now below that, Mongo, in creating Mongo, they were kind of inspired because this became a better standard, arguably, for transmitting data and communicating data formats and everything. So Mongo, or the creators of it, looked at it and were like, hey, we have a lot of problems with how we do databases in terms of scaling it, and like making SQL queries, if you do them wrong, can take a lot of memory and can be really inefficient and have a lot of problems. It's a great language, don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking it. It's just different use cases sometimes. Um, and it's simpler syntax, in my opinion, honestly. And I'll go over that in a minute. But so Mongo looked at it and then said, we have some problems and we need some solutions. And JSON kind of does some of this. So using the inspiration from JSON, which is a subset of JavaScript, on how to notate objects with keys and values, they built their own database. And instead of JSON, they actually use something called BSON, which is binary. I think it's described as binary object notation or something like that. It's like JSON, but it has more data types than JavaScript all the way up here, and just some other features to make the specific database operations easier. So we'll go over that in a minute. So what is JSON? Well, it stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So JSON always starts with curly braces, which holds an object. If you see those curly braces, it's a block of code in JavaScript, or an object often. Now, the square brackets, by contrast, indicate that you're working with a list, otherwise known as an array object, or just arrays. I specifically insist on saying array object because they're both in the same category of JavaScript data types. That's not necessarily the same when you're working with Mongo, but I could be wrong. I haven't actually dug into that part yet. Anyway, so keys must be strings. You can, when you're storing it, you can actually omit those, and when you input it, it'll just automatically convert it. That's the other thing. Is Mongo, it can be pretty forgiving in some ways, whereas SQL, if you mess up, you can mess things up badly. The more important thing is the value needs to be, if it's a string, needs to be in double quotes, I'd say. Data is represented by comma, so we have one set of data, or one instance, another comma, then another instance. Two people, one has the name of John, another has the name of Jane. Alright, so going back to that BSON, this is why I was creating that slide earlier on. So BSON is like binary JSON. You can click this link and actually learn more about it, or we can correct anything that I may have been wrong on. So JSON and BSON, they're our close cousins, like I was saying. And this is the official website of MongoDB. I highly recommend checking this page out. It'll describe this in much more detail. Meantime, let's go back to BSON. Since I took the time to create this little graphic, I'm going to talk about it. So, as you can see, we have, so in JavaScript, it's divided into two kind of categories: primitive types and non-primitive types is how I define it. Other people define it in two ways, but generally speaking, that's pretty common to separate it into two categories. It's not really the same here, or I don't know, maybe they group them. I haven't dug into that, but generally speaking, here are the main data types in Mongo. So we have a string, we have an integer, which is a big part, and I'll get to that in a minute. Boolean, so true or false values. Integers are just whole numbers. They cannot be decimals. Doubles, which are a number which can allow for decimals, and I'll get back to integer and double in a minute. Null, forgot to write the description, as for a lot of these others, apologies. Still work in progress. Object, it's just those brackets with often a key and a value, and you can nest it and do a bunch more. Objects are awesome. JavaScript is inherently a functionally object-oriented language, I guess. Is one way to think of it. Arrays, like I mentioned, are like a shopping list. Timestamp, that's more built into... I'm not going to go into the comparison on that because I don't want to confuse people. Internationalized string is more for converting things from English to Spanish and other languages, is how we can think of that. So that's just kind of something a little stronger than standardized strings. Then finally, the object ID. So when you're creating tables, rows, columns, like you would in SQL and more traditional databases, and you have an ID to identify a unique table, well, every document has a object ID, if I remember right. And I'll show that at some point. So yeah, has a lot more data types than JavaScript, but that's okay. So what is CRUD? Well, it's what we're going to be covering today, and it's a core, fundamental computer programming term in general. Whether you're working with databases, JavaScript, Rust, Go, TypeScript, whatever, like you're going to want to learn how to do CRUD operations and methods in any language. That should be your bread and butter in any kind of language. Arguably as fast as possible, because like right now, your computer is reading some file. It's reading an HTML file to help display this Twitch page. It's reading data for the video. It's reading data for that audio. It's updating in real time because it's working with a stream. If you type in chat, you can create a message or delete a message or update one. So these are all fundamental stuff, and it's not just unique to the web, on your phone, on your computer, anywhere. So CRUD simply is an acronym that stands for create, read, update, delete. Now, in Mongo specifically, I'm simplifying things to kind of make this connection to Mongo. And that is, we use the insert method to create some kind of data. We use the find method to find the data that we're trying to read. To update the data that we found, or whatever data we want to update, we want to use the update command. And there's a bit more to that, and that actually can be a little tricky in some ways, so I'm going to simplify that as much as possible. Update is very powerful here because you're working with often arrays, but you can work with others too. Anyway, and there's other methods than just update that operate as an update CRUD method, but I'm only going over this one for simplicity. Delete, we're going to use remote. Technically, you could think of other methods, including, I don't want to confuse people. We're just going to use that to demonstrate a basic CRUD delete method. So let's dig in, all right? So we're going to compare SQL and Mongo real quick. So comparing the create method, right? So in SQL, we use the insert command to select from a table called book. And then we're defining our columns of title and author. And then then we have rows. So for each book would be a different row. So here's one book. And we have a column for the title and the author, or two columns, right? Now, let's see. Now inside of the braces, the parentheses here, sorry, we set something. The parentheses are used to define those columns. I've been up a lot, so I need to change that. Finally, to insert the data into those columns, or to kind of link them, we'd use the values keyword, separated again with parentheses, in quotation. Believe they can be single or double. In this case, they're single. And the first item, which is for the title of the book, is JavaScript first. Now, because I guess I'm a millennial, my full name is my Twitter handle. Yeah, yay, subscribe. I'm kidding. My Twitter bot is probably more entertaining. Anyway, that value is separated by a comma, and then the next value that goes into the author column. Alright, so hopefully we're still with us. Everyone is still on the same page. Comparing create methods. So let's go over the query syntax for Mongo. So DB in this case, right over here, refers to the current database that we are using. And in the exercise, we'll go over this more. Whereas the book refers to the collection, no, the document that we're, it refers to the collection. And then inside of that collection, we're going to have multiple documents, which we can leave, which are rows, if I remember right. Then inside of our cert method, inside of those parentheses, we're going to put an object, right? So we start with parentheses, we end with parentheses, we move on, we type the property, or in Mongo, title would actually be called a key, not a property. The value of that key is in the string, or in some cases a parentheses, as we'll go over in a minute. Bottom line, left-hand side is the key, right-hand side is the value. And that's more or less the same between them, just different terms. In Mongo, the left-hand side is referred to a key, the right-hand side is referred to as the value. SQL, we have our column and our values for those columns. Oh crud. So, this part of the exercise you can go on completely by yourself, and we're going to be demonstrating through GitPod and not in here. So let's see. Oh crud. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to type Mongo to open up the shell to our database. And this is different from the normal terminal. This space right here is called our terminal. When we hit Control-C or Command, we can go into the normal terminal and have normal Linux commands. When we type Mongo, we go into their shell or their terminal. It's another way to think of it. Alright, so now we can use JavaScript-like syntax for a database. To show all the databases, we're going to go show DBS. As you can see, there's some other ones from previous exercises. The default ones are actually, if I remember right, admin, config, and local. And so today, the instructions that are written go on to using state bar. I'm going to just wing it and do something a little different to show a comparison to help kind of connect things and give you experience. So you can follow along in either way. Alright, so we're going to use the use command to select the Mongo database. So, state bar. Now, we are going to call the database that we just selected with the use command. add a dot to access property of it, or child is another way to think of it. Then we're going to call that state bar with a capital B, or you know what, let's just, I am going to do here. So and today we are going to pretend that we are lawyers, and we are adding a new lawyer to the state bar. And then at the very end we will be removing someone because they were naughty. And now we're going to use the insert command, and note that here what we're doing is we're going to be doing it in one line because Mongo can be kind of weird like that. And then we do the brackets, right? Here and here. And we're going to do, instead of typing Hans, I want you to type out my name and do that. And if you're reviewing this video later in a recorded format, if I do that, I want you to type your name in here and a few of your friends in there with their hobbies and their computers. And then change out the rows and take this exercise further than what I go over it. Use the documentation. Learn on your own. It's not to say that I'm not teaching you it, but when you get a job in tech, you're going to be expected to learn things on the job. Things move fast. So rather than watching any of these tutorials and going step by step, I want you to encourage you to deviate. Follow it first so that you know what's going on and you know how it worked. But then don't just stop the video and you're done, or after you completed. Go out and try something. Ask yourself, how can I change this? How can I update this a hobby differently? How can I update the OS? How can I update the row of this person or that person? Ask these kind of questions that you would reasonably want to do in modifying a database, and then research it. Most of our job isn't just coding, it's researching. The more experience that we have, the less time we spend researching, and the more time we spend coding uninterrupted. But that takes time, and that takes experience, and that just takes practice. But that being said, even with all the practice in the world, sometimes methods will change or be removed entirely, and you have to relearn how you are doing things. So don't be afraid of that. What you should be more afraid of is people who don't teach you how to think critically or provide you the skills to do that. So, let's go off with a name. Nope. Colon, and then 2 commas, and then in between them, you're going to do your name, or sorry, the first time you're going to do my name, just Hans, to keep it simple, comma after, then we're going to do row with a number, then we're going to do OS, which is a string of Mac, which I don't think I will buy a Mac again because I hate how they're doing their hardware policies. Hobbies, and this is going to be an array or list. And you could do a different object as well, but we're not going to do that right now. But that may be something that you would like to try out on your own. Or even better yet, the most valuable thing you can do is change these to different data types, such as all the ones mentioned over here. To do that, if you're ever running this locally, I just press escape while I'm clicked on here. Alright, now let's stay focused. So, I'm going to add that on the side, I don't just like doing JavaScript. I like doing a lot of different things. I like doing 3D printing, 3D design that I'm absolutely awful at and do not have the software or hardware to really do well at the time, but I love doing it and it's really fun. Because I can build things physically, and those will, the power goes out, I still have proof that I can do something, and that's something that I like. I really value hardware development as much as I do software development, because at the end of the day, power goes out, you still have something physical to prove that, I don't know, you have some skills. Even if it's a dead weight, you still have something physical. Otherwise, no one knows if you built a website if no one can access a website. So I like doing physical things as much, physical products, as much as I do digital products, or products, projects, whatever. Which brings me to another kind of hobby, product design. I also like, even though I don't do this a lot right now, I kind of miss it, honestly, it's web design. There's so much advantages that, and things that have gone on with web design since I last did it full time on the front end. You know, CSS Grid, Flex, those were still fairly new when I was doing it a lot. And now I just played a bunch of different roles after 5 years of coding. So, let's see. Is that it? That should be it. Making sure that we end that with a bracket to close out our object, and then end it with parentheses. This is why we want to start with it and not just type them out on the end. So at least that's my 2 cents. You can do it however the hell you want, I don't care. So let's do find now. And we can use the generic kind of find to see all the stuff in there. Uh-oh. That's not supposed to happen. Oh. What'd I do wrong? Did I mess you up? So, if you were watching the stream, or are watching the stream, you should comment in chat what the bug is. I'm going to tell you what it is. But stay tuned after this advertisement. No, I'm kidding. I'm never going to do that. Oh, nope. Nope. I'm trying to create a new file, and I forgot that Control M doesn't work in the text editor. Yeah, text, whatever. I'm gonna delete that stupid thing anyway. Just need to paste something. Nope, that's the wrong value. Alright, let's just grab it from the source then. So, problem was this and this. And yes, it was intentional. Because it's fun to make bugs. Honestly, that's how you learn. You won't learn very much if you're always writing perfect code. Because then you won't learn how to debug your code when it does go wrong. You're human. You're gonna write buggy code. Don't pretend like you're not. Don't lie to others. Don't sell yourself short at a job interview, but don't lie to people. Like, you're not going to write buggy, like, clean code 100% of the time. You're not going to write code that's 100% test-driven. It's just, it's not the world we live in. Now, state bars with a Z. And I'm not sure if this is an issue with, because I've done this fine without putting in one line on my local machine. So this might be, I don't know. I need to dig in why I need to do it this way. That still didn't. Alright. No, that should work. Nope, because we're not doing that. State bars. That's what happened. So we never used state bars with a Z. So let's walk through the process that I was using to debug this. This is what a lot of coders don't do. Even when you see them make mistakes on stream or anything, they don't go through the metacognition of how they track that error down. And it's really important when you're teaching, I learned, to provide that metacognition so that people can save themselves from kind of learning it on their own and struggling. So back here, you can go up and down on the arrows and go through your recent commands. And you know, I have the experience down, so I knew it early on, that way back through. So we went to show DBS. This was our first command that we went over. Then I'm hitting down on the arrow. We use use state bar, so that's where the error happened. We hit db state bars with a Z without declaring use state bars with a Z. So this database wasn't collected. The other thing that happened is I gave you some bad directions in explaining what this was. So this is the database that you're selecting. And then so we went through here, and if we scroll up, see how it said 0? So going back to, again, binary JSON, 0 is off or false. 1 is true. So in that same concept, what do you think this error is saying? Well, we have the error message right here. DB already exists with different case, already have state bar. Trying to create state bar. Interesting, right? Notice how nothing happened in find, so I was trying to see what would happen, what that data would be. It wasn't pulling up. So let's go over here. Alright, so now we can do this. And now our instance is there. So let's go back up again. You don't have to retype it all out. Just hit up and down on the arrow key to go through the commands. Now, we can do stuff like this. That's if we just hold it. TJ, I'm just making up names. TJ is in the first row. He's a really good student studying for the state bar, and he's going to pass everything. So we're just going to add him because we already know. I'm kidding. Don't do that. That's awful. But he's really good at learning Mongo. So when he's querying state law cases or even Supreme Court cases from big amounts of data, he's going to have the skills to come up on top of his competitors and know how certain judges ruled on specific types of cases, how they ruled in family law or criminal law or whatever. This is an advantage that having some database knowledge has if you're a lawyer, by the way. I know a few lawyers because I've taught them. And never, ever make the mistake of undervaluing a lawyer. So this lawyer, TJ, knows how to use Mongo because he's learning and he's sitting up in the front row of the class or of the state bar review, whatever. I'm not a lawyer. I want to know how that stuff works. Now here, if I do options, and that's a different key on Windows, I'm forgetting off the top of my head. I'm sorry. Leave a comment or something if you know about it. We can just go from here and do a different name. So let's do Tito or Tito. I'm kidding. I'm just making stuff up. They are going to be in the second row though, because they're bad. They're also learning Mongo though, so we're going to leave that the same. So here we're still just creating data and updating our database, right? So let's just fill that a bit more. Then we are going to go find. Now we see all of these and see how they're not all the same. Awesome. All right, so let's do, where is it? Oh. Come back. So let's find all the people in row 1 now. So we showed how to find all of them in this collection. Let's see if we go ahead and filter out by all those people with just row 1. Okay, so it's just me, the teacher, and TJ, who is studying for the bar and learning Mongo just to be a better lawyer. All right. Now, that is effectively us reading the database and the data in it. So that's the second method in CRUD. Create, read, update, delete. All right. So now let's try updating something. Now, this is a little different. So we have what we're selecting here, which is the name, and then we have the value. So here we're targeting by the name. Now we could target by other things. We could target by the OS. We could target by the row. We could target whatever we want. And then we're going to separate it by a comma, put in another object with those curly braces here and here. And we're going to use this push method. Now there are a lot of different methods on update. There's also update one only or update many only. There's other update methods as well. So bear that in mind. And that's where reading our documentation and finding out the right methods for the right use case comes in handy. And you could either learn that on your own and save yourself a bunch of money being curious and getting honestly better applied skills. Or you can pay a bunch of money and go to a boot camp. Maybe have debt, maybe get a job after it. Who knows? It's never guaranteed, nor should it be. Bottom line, you want to be curious, you want to be looking up these methods and making sure that they're fitting your use case. And learning actively. That's your job as a developer, is to learn, research problems, and then write code to solve that problem. Coders don't just code, we use code to solve problems. That's our real job. Alright, so we're going to delete that. We're going to type update. Then we're going to do our first object, right? I'm going to make it a little easier for you to see. We're going to pick on, I don't like this person here. I don't know. Sounds like a fake name. Probably it's just some spam got in our database, right? Hopefully that isn't anyone's actual name. Generally just making stuff up. So don't be offended. Wasn't intentional. Nothing personal. Push. And then we're going to have the... So again, going back to left and right values, right? So left is what we're updating. And then right is what it's being updated to. So let's see. We're going to update our hobbies, which is what kind of data type? An array, which looks like that. Not that. That's an object. That's an array. Now, but we're going to target specifically one that has teaching in that example, but I didn't add teaching, did I? So what we're going to do is we're going to not do that and do Hans. We're going to do teaching and streaming really badly. Oh, where was my semicolon? Or let's read this error. When we get errors on our screen, this isn't a bad thing. This isn't, oh no, it broke. No, you told the computer to do something, and it did that something. But it didn't work because you did something wrong. And that's fine. We're humans. We're going to make mistakes. Doesn't matter if you're doing this a year, or a few days, or 5 years. You're going to do something wrong. You're going to make mistakes. Get over it. Just have humility and have confidence in yourself to solve them. So let's read this. Take a breath. Read the error. Read it out loud if you need to. Syntax error. Missing colon after property list at shell 1.9. So that would be line 49, I believe, if it were all spread out. So let's look at it. So we have our first object that's opened and closed. We have our second one. So you see what happened? We didn't have one before and after push. We have one before. We have one after. But where are the other ones? See what I did there? Said one thing, and it was a different one. A, I'm human. B, I'm really tired. And C, the important thing is that we're identifying the errors. So let's go ahead and add that. Up on the arrow. Start with the end one, in this case. Add another space so it's maybe a little more readable. Right, 1. What does 1 mean, guys? It means true. Going back to binary. Now let's just check the first row. See how teaching was added? Awesome. Now let's go ahead. Instead of that, let's do a remove. You know what? Let's create another one. So we had a last minute person taking state bar, and we think, and they aren't really interested in learning Mongo. They're kind of, anyone can learn it, but they just, I don't know, they don't have the time to learn that. But so their hobby is crime. And the only reason they're a lawyer is to do human trafficking, taking people across state lines, infants, during a pandemic. So we have this really bad lawyer, and he's going to somehow get passed through the state bar, admitted. Let's call him Doug. Because that would be a very Doug thing to do, or very trip thing to do, you know. So, okay, it's true. So now we have another one. He's in row 1. His hobby is crime. His OS is Mac. Which means you know that he has some money, not just because he's a lawyer, but because he has a Mac. The cheap Chinese stuff that's overpriced. Now, so we've gone over what methods so far? We've gone over CRUD methods to create stuff with insert. We've gone over the CRUD methods to update things. We've gone over, to read things with find, to update things with update, and then finally to delete things or remove them. So let's do that one. Let's remove this criminal. Let's get him disbarred. Move, not removed. Spelling matters. Because spelling or grammar are just syntax errors. You're learning English as well. Isn't that great? Alright, so remove. Let's go over the syntax one more time. Because I don't write Mongo vanilla like this. I often work with Mongoose or some other layer to abstract it. You will occasionally need to do stuff like this. I have. And then just Google it, double check things, ask a coworker for some advice. Whatever. You know, as long as you understand how to work with databases, that you understand CRUD and REST, APIs, you'll learn. It's a long road, but you learn. And it's okay. So let's just, okay, so this is really easy. We can just filter just by the name, right? So, name, capital D. You know what? Let's see what happens, right? We're curious. Best thing I would advise anyone when they're following this tutorial or any others, call my bullshit, especially if you're watching me, because I will purposely cause an error so that you learn how to fix it. Second thing is, whether it's me or someone else, do what they do and then pause the video and just try and do it a little differently, or do the opposite of what they did so that you really understand what's going on. Don't just repeat stuff. Be curious. So being curious. 0. What does 0 mean? It means false. So if we go to find, Doug's still there because we didn't have a capital D. Alright, let's remove the Doug. I'm sorry. Doug's just kind of a bitchy name, so, you know, Doug, dog. Bitchy. Yeah, I like my puns. Anyhow. Where'd he go, guys? Where'd he go? Where'd he go, Doug? Where'd he go, Doug? My dog's also in the room, so he's freaking out right now. Low key. Alright, so that's the last method. Are there anything else? Well, let's see. Where did I put that? Oh, right here. Let's go over here. And let's see if we can just search. Will this allow us? This isn't meant to do this, and my computer is super slow because it's 5 years old. And only has 8 gigs of RAM, so I'm amazed that it's not dead right now. So let's look up, how did we drop a database? So dropping, you might have heard, if you've ever heard about SQL injection or even Mongo injection, that it's a bit more rare, but it does happen, is where you drop the entire database and just delete it, nuke it. So it's another way to think of that delete method, right? Or in terms of CRUD. So we're going to drop the database that we just spent all this time building, which is what I should have done last time I was doing the exercise. Now, Mongo also has some great features. Like, you can run a lot of their stuff in, they have places in their docs where you can actually run Mongo Shell on here, which is really great. The advantage of this individual module, which uses GitHub, is that you have the instructions for a specifically catered lesson that you can build all in one place, and you can do this on a laptop or a tablet, or if you really want a phone, I wouldn't recommend it, but you can. So it's just kind of nice having those options available to you. Let's copy this. Okay, so see how I switched to that? We don't want to do that, do we? No, we don't. What do we want to use? Date bars? Like that, right? No? Like that, right? No? Like that, right? Alright. Now that we switch back to that database. I'm going to run just DB to select the DB. One, okay. Okay's okay. One, that means true. So, me the DBS. Wow. Let's check that out. Oh, so there's nothing in there. So it still shows up on show DBS, but it's empty. And we put so little data here that you're not going to see this go up, because it's just a few bits, and we're measuring in gigabytes. So anyway, so that's the basic first lesson. About an hour, I think it was. Not too bad. Now I'm going to do a separate lesson on Docker Compose that's related at some point. I need to flesh that out and finish my actual description of Mongo and make it better and just practice this more. I barely taught this in high school. I just did a glance over, and I don't have my old content, so I had to rewrite everything from scratch, like today and yesterday, and a few days ago. But it was such a rough draft. It was just, I go from writing the code to writing the explanations, and the writing the explanation part is what actually takes the longest, because coming from a teaching perspective, not just a coding perspective, I want to use things like Bloom's analysis to structure the educational lesson in a way that moves someone from just remembering something to understanding something to applying something to analyzing something, dun 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 dun. And so there's a process that goes along with that, and I learned that when I started teaching in high school, because the professional development was just really good there, and it kind of a shame I kind of wish I could have stayed there longer, but I had a newborn kid and I need to take care of him. So always choose your family first, and never ever regret that. Okay, so now real quickly, so I prefer actually going over this with Docker Compose, and that's because it's a lot easier, I think, to do it this way. And the reason I say that is because when we work with Docker Compose, we can actually do a lot more images, and we can actually have like a visual backend. And I haven't taken the time to really figure out how to do that on 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 GitPod. I'm sure there's a way to do it, but they don't have Docker Compose support. They just have Docker support. So I would have to do that in a different way, and that's fine. That takes time to research. I don't specialize in Docker. I know how to wrap my stuff in a Docker container, push it out into production, and manage it that way. But I'm not a Docker specialist. Docker for me is just one tool in a very big toolbox that I use to build websites, servers, mobile apps, whatever I want. And to have my local development environment be essentially the same as your production environment. And that's why you want to use Docker, and that's why more boot camps and schools should be teaching that as part of their standardized curriculum. And that's why it's going to be in my book, at least in part. And I could definitely use any contributors who know it a lot better. Let's see. What were we looking up? Oh, we need to go to localhost. So what I'm going to show you is how to visualize this database. I think it's 8081, so that's not going to do anything. 8081. That looks right. So if you've ever used PHP MyAdmin to look up a SQL database, this is something very similar. And this is called Mongo Express. There are other dashboards like this, and this is just wrapped in its own self-contained container. So you notice there's no data here, because this is a different database. This is the database on our local machine, and inside this Docker that we just spun up. So it's a completely new instance. So let's say if we took this data here, in this case we're going to do Docker IT, nope, dash IT, I think. Docker it, Mongo, I think it's learn dash Mongo. And what I'm doing here is I'm getting into the Mongo shell inside of Docker. That was the wrong command. Let's pull up our Docker file and see. I had the same problem yesterday when I was streaming this, but the stream is a lot more. Nope, wrong one. I need to be over here. And I'm going to pull up this file, which is our YAML file. And we don't need that. We don't really need that anymore, because no one's watching. And that's fine. We're going to have to look this up. That's fine. Everyone forgets methods all the time. Don't ever be ashamed of that. Again, we're just human. Do I have a... Nope, okay. So I have a whole mono repo where I just do various Docker related things, mostly with Docker Compose. So I have it all in one place instead of a bunch of different... I have 150 repositories that not all of them are forked, and I believe most of them are just small little front-end things that I tried here or there, and forgot to commit to some of them, and then needed a new computer because I go through them fast. It's the only computer that I've had for more than 2 years, actually more than a year, because I like to take my computer up when I'm hiking and I just work from local and just build everything there. It's relaxing. I get a lot done that way. I'll take it by the pool. I've never lost it to water, but I'll take it by the pool, take a dip, completely drive myself off, and then just get to work. It's a nice way to relax and pace yourself and just get a lot of work done. And also fry your computer because it overheats. That's what the problem with me. Okay, so we're looking up for the Docker one. I have some short commands in here. Docker practice examples. And this one, so this was originally from Brad Travis's, but he has a great course on it. I highly recommend it. I'm going to do something, when I go over and start building the Docker sections more, I'm going to do some stuff similar, but most of it's going to be radically different. Was the IT command, but that wasn't the example I was looking for. This has all the examples. I meant to have that in our Git repo, but I don't know where it went. Oh well. Learn. I'm just gonna search this repo. Let's run it. What's it in GhostPod? Did this yesterday too. Forgot where it was. Let's check out Ghostplate. I think I left it in there. I have a package.json file where I store these commands when I work on projects, so that I don't have to look them up, and I just use npm scripts. And that's was something that I integrated in the original lesson, which I think I deleted. And there isn't I didn't commit that file. There it is. That is how we show to Docker eventually. That's fine. So if you're going through this exercise, try and store all your commands in this file. That's actually why that file exists, by the way, so that you can just store them and save them and commit them when you fork this repo or do whatever you want with it. So forgot to mention that, and I need to include that in the lesson. It's fine. Now let's just do this real quick. I'm just going to copy all this. And what we really want to do is go through here. So that successfully wrote. Okay, cool. I'm just going to fill this with dummy data. And the reason I'm doing this because, you know, people have names, is so that I can show you more visually how you can edit this. And this is how I prefer to work with data in Mongo for a variety of reasons. I prefer some kind of admin like this, and only when necessary to do more complex things do shell. So let's just refresh this, and we should see that database pop up. Yep, so there it is. And then what we're gonna do, we can hit the view button here. We can even export it as JSON. That's cool, right? Which makes it super fun to work with. Do I have pretty fine? Pretty? I guess my code can't be very pretty. It's not going to win any beauty pageants because I forgot to install that again. We can also import data into this collection, and we can export it as just our standard Mongo structure instead of our JSON. Now the great thing about, because we're working, and that Mongo provides this kind of exporting of data in JSON format. So often when we make a request to a server, we get that response back in JSON form. So rather than querying a database with SQL and then converting the data from whatever format they have into JSON, it's already there. And so that's a pretty neat little advantage of Mongo, but the querying syntax can be a bit verbose, a bit long, a bit tedious, and so there's pros and cons to everything. Also, when we work with big data, Mongo and SQL, none of them are actually the best solution. There's better solutions out there now, and so I like toying around with new tools. I've been learning, I forgot, it shows how much I learned on it. R a little, I learned a little bit about that in a senior, it might have been junior year of college, before I even got into programming really, and that was just for statistics. But I learned after coding for like 4 years that R is actually really useful for working with big data and very performant compared to SQL and other languages. So been meaning to spend some more time getting into that. So anyway, hopefully you bear with me if you ever watch this. I can get through an hour and like 45 minutes of me rambling and have something to take away with from this. Even though it's very simple, I'm trying to break it down very short. This is about the same kind of time period that I would spend in a normal classroom, which was from first class was 1 o'clock to 3:30. So I think I'm actually ahead of time in some ways. And bear in mind, when you're teaching, if you'll notice in this video, I specifically ask rhetorical questions to an audience that doesn't exist. And so that's just how you do things in class. You want to take that time, that filler time, to check for student understanding. That's something I want to actually make a habit of introducing in all of my videos. And eventually I'll actually add slides to them now that I built this tool out to incorporate these knowledge checks into them, so that if any teacher, preferably people less boring than me, can just pick up my curriculum, change it, and teach it however the hell they want. They can, instead of state bars, use a different example. It doesn't matter about the specific code that you're using. The value isn't the curriculum, it's the teachers and how they teach it, whether it's online or in person. And how are they checking the students' knowledge? Are they just moving on too fast? I'll be honest, I did that way too often, because it was my first semester teaching. And any teacher tells you when you first start, especially in public school, it's always going to be, your first semester is always going to be the worst. Your first year is always going to be the worst. But you learn a lot in that. You learn a lot in general from just trying, succeeding, or failing, or both. That's part of being a professional in any industry. is learning, is as long as your progression is upward, that's all that matters. And having the humility to admit that when you're going down, to pull yourself up and bring yourself up as a result. And just do it by doing what's needed. Such a